Horror story. The moon hung low over the beach, casting its pale glow across the empty sands, turning the world into a ghostly landscape. The waves lapped gently against the shore, a soft and rhythmic whisper under the vast night sky. It would have been peaceful, even beautiful, if not for the figure walking along the shoreline, a man tall and thin, his clothes ragged and dark, blending with the shadows. Every night he was there. No one knew where he came from or where he went once the sun began to rise. The locals had learned to avoid him, to cross the street if they saw him shuffling toward the beach as dusk fell. Something about him, something unseen, something unspoken, set their instincts on edge. His presence carried a weight, a wrongness. At first, people had tried to be polite. A couple of fishermen had nodded to him, offered a friendly wave, but his reaction was unsettling. He didn't respond, didn't even look at them. He just kept walking, eyes fixed straight ahead as if they weren't even there. It wasn't long before rumors started. Some said he had no home, no family. Others whispered about curses, strange illnesses, accidents that had befallen anyone who tried to approach him. A heart attack here, a car crash there. Coincidences, surely, but the kind that made people nervous. Soon enough, no one tried to speak to him at all. The man became a fixture of the night, a part of the beach itself, as constant as the waves. I watched him from my window sometimes. My apartment overlooked the beach, and I could see him from the balcony, pacing that same stretch of sand, his movements slow and deliberate, his head always slightly lowered. He never deviated from his path. Always in the same direction, always the same steps. He looked more like a shadow than a person, drifting along the shore, never venturing into the water, never leaving footprints in the sand. People said he never left footprints. It wasn't until the night of the storm that I started paying closer attention. It had been a muggy day, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. The wind howled through the streets, but the beach, as always, was deserted except for him. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, dark clouds swallowing the stars, the air thick with static. I was on my balcony, watching the waves grow restless, crashing harder against the rocks, when I saw him again. He didn't hurry his steps, didn't seem to notice the change in the weather at all. He walked with the same steady pace, his head tilted slightly toward the sky. But this time something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to avoid him, the way the rain, which had started to fall in torrents, didn't drench his clothes like it did everything else. He moved as though the storm wasn't happening, as though he existed in a world separate from mine. I watched him for what felt like hours, my breath caught in my throat. It was impossible to tear my eyes away. The way he walked, the way the world seemed to bend around him, it didn't feel right. My heart hammered in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Just when I thought he would turn around, just when I was sure he would vanish into the night like he always did, he stopped. My stomach dropped. He never stopped. Not once had I ever seen him pause, not for anything. But now he was standing still, his back to me, his figure barely visible through the mist rising from the sea. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the balcony rail so tight my knuckles turned white. He stood there, motionless, as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, slowly, agonizingly slow, he turned his head toward the sky. Lightning split the clouds, and in that flash of light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His face was wrong. Not deformed or damaged, just wrong. It was as if someone had painted the features of a man but hadn't gotten them quite right. His eyes were too far apart, his nose too sharp, his mouth twisted in a way that didn't make sense. For the first time in years, I felt real fear. The kind that makes you question your reality, the kind that plants doubt in the back of your mind about whether you've truly been safe this whole time. I scrambled back inside, slamming the glass door shut behind me, my heart thudding in my ears. I didn't look out the window again that night. The next day I learned about the tourists. A group of Spanish-speaking visitors had come to the beach that evening. They hadn't heard the rumors, hadn't been warned to stay away from the stranger who haunted the shore. They approached him, excited, laughing, pointing to the stormy waves as they tried to make conversation in broken English. They didn't know. They didn't understand. The man didn't respond at first. He never did. But this time something changed. He turned toward them and smiled. The sea was unusually calm that night. The storm from the previous day had passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The waves, usually loud and relentless, had quieted to a soft murmur, barely kissing the shore. The air was thick with humidity, and the clouds overhead hung like a heavy curtain, trapping the warmth of the day beneath them. On the beach, the group of Spanish tourists laughed among themselves, their voices light and carefree in contrast to the eerie silence around them. The stranger, him, had walked past them earlier, just like every night, ignoring their friendly attempts at conversation. He had drifted back into the shadows, into that place where the darkness swallowed the beach, and life seemed to flicker and fade. One of the tourists, a young man named Miguel, decided to take a walk along the shore. He was in good spirits, his mind still buzzing from the excitement of the day, and the quiet waves seemed to beckon him. His friends stayed behind, chattering in rapid Spanish about their plans for the following day, the beach trip nothing more than another adventure. Miguel kicked off his sandals, letting the cool, damp sand squish beneath his feet. He breathed in deeply, the salty air filling his lungs, and began to walk, the night wrapping around him like a warm blanket. The soft crunch of his steps was the only sound in the stillness, the waves now little more than whispers in the distance. As he walked, he felt the calm wash over him. The night was peaceful, the sea and sky blending together into an endless expanse of darkness. There was no wind, no movement, just the steady rhythm of his breathing and the gentle pull of the earth beneath his feet. He felt a strange sense of solitude, as though the world had shrunk down to just him and the beach and everything else had faded away. But then as he glanced up, something caught his eye. Far in the distance, barely visible against the horizon, was a flicker of light. At first, it was so faint he thought he might have imagined it, a trick of the light, perhaps, or a distant reflection on the water. But no, there it was again. A tiny, wavering flame, dancing against the darkness. Miguel frowned, curiosity tugging at him. The beach was supposed to be deserted. There were no bonfires allowed this time of year, and the local police were strict about enforcing that rule. Yet here it was, a flame, unmistakable and growing brighter as he walked closer. The rest of the world seemed to fall away as he made his way toward the light. His steps quickened, his heart beating just a little faster. The silence around him became more profound, the calmness of the sea suddenly feeling heavy, oppressive. But still he pressed on, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. As he drew closer, the shape of the fire came into focus. It wasn't large, just a small, concentrated blaze, barely more than a few burning logs stacked on the sand. The flames licked the air, casting long, flickering shadows across the ground. There was no one around. No voices. No sign of life. Just the fire, burning alone in the dark. Miguel's footsteps slowed, his brow furrowing. Someone had to have started it. But why leave it unattended? He glanced around, his eyes scanning the beach for any sign of movement, but the shadows stretched long and empty around him. He was alone. A chill crawled up his spine, despite the warmth of the fire, and he took a hesitant step forward, his curiosity mingling with a growing sense of unease. The flames crackled softly, the sound oddly sharp in the otherwise silent night. Just as he reached the edge of the fire, something shifted in the air. A soft rustling sound, so quiet it was almost imperceptible, came from behind him. Miguel's breath caught in his throat, his body going rigid. He turned, slowly, his heart thudding in his chest, but the beach behind him was empty. Nothing but the quiet lapping of the waves and the distant outlines of the dunes. He exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. His nerves were playing tricks on him. It had to be the silence, the isolation. He had wandered too far from his friends, that's all. He turned back to the fire, thinking he might just douse it and head back. But before he could move, something cold wrapped around his ankle. He froze. His breath hitched, his muscles tensing as the sensation registered. He looked down, expecting to see seaweed or driftwood tangled around his feet, but what he saw instead sent a jolt of terror through him. It was a rope. A thick, wet rope, coiled around his ankle, tightening with each second that passed. He gasped, trying to pull his leg free, but the rope yanked back with an unnatural force, dragging him closer to the fire. His hands clawed at the sand, his legs kicking wildly, but it was no use. The rope was relentless, pulling him toward the flames with a strength that didn't make sense. Like something beneath the sand was alive, tugging him with purpose. "Ayuda!" he screamed, his voice ragged and panicked, but the beach was empty. His friends were too far away, their laughter distant and muffled, as though it belonged to another world entirely. The rope jerked again, and this time, it wasn't just around his ankle. Another length of it shot up from the sand, wrapping around his wrists, binding them tightly. Miguel struggled, his muscles burning as he fought against the binds, but the more he resisted, the tighter the ropes grew. His heart raced, his mind scrambling for answers, but none of it made sense. He was alone, wasn't he? And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the rope gave one final violent pull, sending him hurtling forward, straight into the fire. The heat seared his skin instantly. Flames roared up around him, licking at his clothes, scorching his arms and legs. He screamed, A high, ragged sound that tore from his throat as the fire consumed him, his body writhing in agony. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, acrid and thick as the fire swallowed him whole. And then, darkness.